In this brief video lecture, I want to talk about social norms. Now, for those of you who have already watched my video lecture on intrinsic motivation, I think you'll see some similarities, but they're not identical. And I will try to clarify the distinction between them as we go through this lecture. So social norms are the norms we're kind of unspoken way we're thinking when we make friendly requests of others. Look at when you ask somebody to help you out, or when somebody asks you to help out, some immediate reciprocity, quid pro quo, is not required at all. Now that's different from market norms. Market norms include things like wages and prices and interests and costs and benefits and all that. And market norms immediately get us thinking about the idea that, there should be some comparable exchange here. What I'm giving you should be comparable to what you're giving me. And I expect payment to be in a reasonable time frame, an agreed upon time frame. None of that happens when we're talking about social norms. Let's start with a really simple example of an experiment. Then we'll give you some real world things, okay? In this experiment, people are sitting in front of a computer screen. There's a box, visualize this, there's a box on the right-hand side of the screen. And your task as a participant is to take a circle that's elsewhere on the screen and using the mouse, drag it into the box. And you're asked to drag as many circles as you can in 5 minutes. So that's the task. And participants are put into 3 groups at random. Some participants are given $5 up front when they enter the room, and told, drag as many circles as you can into the box. Other participants were paid 50 cents up front. Again, they're then told to drag as many circles as you can into the box. Other participants, no mention was made of money at all. They were just asked to drag as many circles as they could into the box, just as a favor, just to help us out with this research. That's all. You can see that there are social norms involved in the third condition there, but market norms in the first 2. Let's see what happens. The people who received $5 up front, on average, dragged about 159 circles. Those who were paid 50 cents per circle, they dragged 101 circles, far less. Only 2/3 of what the other group had done. But the people weren't offered any money at all. It was just introduced as a social request to them, just a favor. They dragged 168 circles. That is, people worked harder when no money was on the line than when 50 cents was on the line. Apparently, $5 was enough that people felt motivated to do something. So they worked really hard. Same thing when it was just a favor. But once you're offering me 50 cents, I'm thinking to myself, like a market norm is now in my mind. I'm thinking, 50 cents, that's not a lot of money, is it? So they don't work as hard. Let's do the same experiment again. This time we won't talk about money. Some participants are given a Snickers bar instead of 50 cents. Some are given a box of Godiva chocolates instead of $5. By the way, a Snickers bar is worth about 50 cents and a box of Godiva chocolates is worth about $5, but no mention was made of money. And as you can see here looking at the results, now both groups performed in a very similar way. Because offering a Snickers bar or a box of Godiva chocolates didn't trigger market norms. Those such small gifts kind of kept all of us in the world of social norms, not in the world of market norms. And what if we run the study a third time? This time we tell people, we're going to give you a 50-cent Snickers bar. We're going to give you a $5 box of Godiva chocolates. Well, now, the fact that we've said what the Snickers bar is worth and what the Godiva chocolates are worth, now people have a market norm. And it turns out that the people who are in the 50-cent Snicker bar condition, they don't work hard at all. Because once you mention money, this shifts people into the realm of market norm, and 50-cent Snickers bar, just not enough to motivate me. My time is worth more than 50 cents. Now, let's take a real-world example of this. A number of years ago, AARP, which is the large, massively large, actually, tens and tens and tens of millions of people, organization of retired persons, which, by the way, includes people from basically 50 and up. So vast majority of people in it actually aren't retired. But AARP asked lawyers, reached out to a number of lawyers, and asked them if they would offer their services to needy retirees at $30 an hour. Almost all the lawyers said no. In a subsequent attempt, AARP reached out to lawyers again. This time they asked lawyers if they would offer their services for free to these needy retirees. Now the vast majority of lawyers said yes. It's kind of counterintuitive, right? It's like, wait a minute. When they were offered $30 an hour, they said no. When they were offered nothing, just would you be willing to do this? Now they say yes. And think about why. Because once you're offering an attorney $30 an hour, you've generated a market norm, a market frame of reference. And any attorney is going to be thinking, $30 an hour? My time is worth way more than $30 an hour. You can't buy my time for $30 an hour. But if you ask the lawyer to just help, now almost all of them will say, sure, I want to help needy retirees. I'd be delighted to do that. Sign me up. You know why? Because I'm going to feel good when I do that. Because what you've got me doing right now is I'm in a social norm, not a market norm. Another study that Dan Ariely did from Duke is he got a big truck and he asked passersby to help unload a sofa from the truck. Again, just at random, people were assigned to 3 different conditions as they walked by. Some people were offered a reasonable wage, a reasonable amount of money to help unload the sofa from the truck. Some people were simply asked to do it as a favor. Could you help me with this? And others were offered a very small amount of money. Well, it turns out that people are willing to help when they are offered a good amount of money. It's market norms. If you offer them a good amount of money, people are like, okay, yeah, I think I'm willing to do this for that amount of money. They're also just as willing to help when you ask them for free. I'm just asking you to help me. Same percentage, all willing to help for free, for no money at all. But if you offer a small payment, which you would think should increase willingness to help compared to those who are asked to do it for free, exactly the opposite happens. No, I won't do it for that small amount of money. Because again, you've generated a market norm mindset and the money just isn't worth it. Here's an example that pursues this a little further. In a laboratory study, participants were asked to complete what's called a scrambled sentence test. You've seen these probably. There's a bunch of words in a row or in a box. Your job is to kind of unscramble them to form a sentence. And some of the sentences that people were unscrambling were kind of neutral. An example is, it's cold outside. But some sentences that people were unscrambling had words in them that were related to money. For example, it might have a phrase like high-paying salary in it. So, different conditions. Some people just kind of unscrambling these neutral sentences. Others, a number of the sentences they're unscrambling have words related to money. Then all the participants are asked to complete a difficult, challenging puzzle. And they're told, listen, you can ask the experimenter for help. Well, participants who had worked on unscrambling sentences with language related to money in it, they waited 5.5 minutes before they asked for help. Where those who worked on the neutral sentences, they waited only 3 minutes. In essence, just asking people to do these, unscramble these sentences, where some of the sentences involved something to do with money, doing that made people more self-reliant. They waited, they wanted to work harder. That sounds really interesting. But you know what else? As other parts of the study, they were less willing to help others. When asked to help the experimenter enter data, they were less willing to do so. When they're in a room with another participant who seems confused, they're less willing to help. When a stranger spills a box of pencils on the ground, they don't help. In essence, once we activated the idea of money in people's mindsets, they became more selfish and more self-reliant. Here's another real-world example, one of my favorites. An Israeli daycare center, this is a big problem, by the way, if you know anybody who works in a daycare center. So this example came from a daycare center in Israel. And they decided that parents were arriving late to pick up their kids. And so they thought, well, what can we do to stop this? This is just crazy. So what we're going to do is we're going to impose fines on parents who arrive late. But it didn't work. Because before the fines were there, parents who arrived late felt guilty. And it led most parents to be more prompt in picking up their kids in the future. Not all, but most. But once the daycare center imposed a fine for being late, the parents' mindset changes. Now they're thinking, I'm just paying for my tardiness. There's like a market norm. Okay, I understand that I'm late, but I'm going to pay them for it. So I can decide whether or not I want to be late or not. I don't feel guilty if I'm late. I'm paying them if I'm late. So it didn't work at all. In fact, the number of parents who were picking their kids up late increased notably after the fines were put in place. Precisely the opposite of what one might expect. Because of the switch here from social norms to market norms. Oddly enough, when that fine was removed, the daycare center said, okay, forget it, we're going to get rid of the fines. Turns out parents' behavior didn't change. They continued to pick up their kids late. That is, when a social norm collides with a market norm, the social norm tends to go away for a long time. So I ask you, you think it'd be a good idea to fine employees who are late for meetings? What if you fined employees $1 for every 5 minutes they're late for a meeting? Put the $1 in the jar for every 5 minutes you're late. What do you think happens? I asked this not as a purely abstract question. Many years ago, I worked for a woman who I really liked and I thought was incredibly cool and had a lot of nerve, to say the least. And her boss, who was pretty high up, decided to have a fine for if you were late. And you were fined $1 for every 5 minutes you were late. And the woman I was working for, she hated these meetings. Just hated them. So and most of the meetings were about an hour. Right? $1 for every 5 minutes. That means, if you weren't even at the meeting at all, if you just said, well, I'm not going to go at all, you had to pay $1 for every 5 minutes, right? That's about $12, right? So this is true. I'm not kidding. This woman would walk in at the very beginning of the meeting. She'd take out $12. She'd put it in the jar in the center of the table and she'd walk out. She just paid for the privilege of not being at the meeting at all. She didn't feel guilty anymore because she paid the fine. She did what the market norm asked her to do. These social norm and market norm concepts come up a lot. You can see the way companies market themselves. Some companies market themselves as social companions. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Or another company, you can do it, we can help. And that's all fine. But what happens if the customer's check bounces at a bank that has this kind of social norm marketing strategy? Listen, if the relationship was based on market norms in the first place, they're not claiming to be your neighbor or anything like that. The bottom line is check bounces, the bank charges you a fee, and the customer knows, that's what's going to happen. I get it. But what if it's, the relationship has been framed as, we're your neighbor, we're your neighborhood bank, we care about you, we're here, we have a relationship, and suddenly, just once, you bounce a check. But everything has been pitched to you as it's kind of a social exchange, a social norm. And then the bank charges you a fee for the bounced check. Now people are furious because you violated this social norm. It's like you stabbed them in the back. You can think about this with companies and the way they treat their employees. Many years ago, people worked 9 to 5. I can remember when people actually did this, and in my life it was usually about maybe 8 to 6, but nonetheless, that was fairly typical. So you knew when you were working and you knew when you weren't working. But in these new kind of 24/7 work environments, social norms could make employees really passionate about their work. It's social norms, I'm engaged, I love my work, I love my company, I'm going to get some work done tonight or on the weekend. And because I'm really engaged. But companies do expect something in return. They do expect the company, and employees expect something in return. And what the employees expect is that the company will care for me, help me out in times of need. But when suddenly this same company that you've been doing all this stuff for cuts your benefits, whether those are pension payments or medical benefits or something as simple as a family picnic, that erodes the social norms. And companies can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways at all. Pick one, but you can't have both. People are very sensitive when you present yourself in the context of social norms, but then really behaving as though everything is market norms. So, a simple question, should you reward an employee with $1,000 or a gift worth $1,000? Sometimes, without saying what the gift is actually worth, by the way. The value of gifts is often ill understood. And I'll share a quick story from my own life about this. Many years ago, I was doing some work on a project when I was working for AT&T. I've been working for a guy, an executive level guy, on a special project that was above and beyond my normal job duties. And I've been doing this work for several months. And it was interesting. I wasn't offered any money to do it. Nor was I offered any reduction in my normal work. But I was working hard on it and learning some stuff. And one day, a Monday morning, I came into my office, and my office was locked during the weekend, and I tend to keep a very neat office, so I usually left my office desk clean with nothing on it. And I noticed and when I opened the door, I noticed there was an envelope sitting in the middle of my desk, which was really odd. And it had my name on it, handwritten. And so it said Jim, so I opened it up. Little handwritten note, and it was from the executive. And the executive in the note basically said, "Hey, thanks for all you've been doing for the past few months. I know you've put a lot of time into this. Your work has been really good, and I value it a lot. And I wanted to find a way to say thank you. So what I want you to do is I want you to take your wife out to a great restaurant, a really great restaurant. I want you to have a wonderful meal. I want you to have the best bottle of wine they have in the place. Have a wonderful time. And then when you're done, send me the bill and I'll pay for everything. Thanks again." Now, I don't know what that costs in contemporary dollars. Let's imagine in contemporary dollars that dinner for me and my wife and the wine and the whole thing, the tip, really expensive place. Imagine it cost $400. Okay? I don't know, but that's a lot. Imagine it's $400, okay? Now, that's very generous. But $400 compared to my salary at AT&T, or $400 compared to my annual bonus, which was many, many thousands of dollars, would seem inconsequential. But that gift meant an enormous amount to me. It meant way more than if he'd given me a check. Because it kind of suggested, it didn't break the social norm and put me into market norms. It just made me think, this guy really appreciates what I'm doing. I'm glad I'm doing it. I've been trying to be helpful. He knows that I have been helpful. He acknowledges that. My wife and I are going to have a good time when we go out. This is wonderful. And it strengthened my relationship with this guy, who I subsequently did work for after both of us actually left AT&T. So a good example of social norms and market norms. Final question I might ask is, well, do you think that offering performance-based salaries and standardized testing to public school teachers will increase the quality of education they give to students? Hey, look at it. We're going to measure your performance using standardized testing of your students. And if your students do well, we're going to offer you some money. Or do you think it would be better to create a climate in schools where teachers feel a sense of purpose, a sense of mission, a sense of pride? Well, all the evidence suggests that the latter is the case. That if you want to change behavior in public schools or in Catholic schools, it's schools that have a sense of purpose and mission and pride that do far better. It's not those that are offering market norms and market wages as a bonus or incentive to their teachers. So money's not always the best way to motivate people. Social norms are cheaper and often more effective. Now, as I close here for the last minute, I just want to note, social norms sound a lot like intrinsic motivation. And they are similar in the sense that both social norms and intrinsic motivation involve circumstances where we exert a lot of effort, not because of any extrinsic factor, not because of market factors, not because of extrinsic rewards or financial rewards, but because of something else. In the case of intrinsic motivation, we are exerting this effort because we find the work intrinsically interesting. We're engaged in the task. We believe it is an intrinsically interesting thing to do. I do it because I like it. In the case of social norms, it's not really so much that I am doing it because I find it interesting or because I like it. I'm doing it as a favor. I'm doing it to be helpful. So it's part of kind of an unspoken social contract. Friendship, friendliness, a sense of social reciprocity, with no expectation of immediate repayment or repayment in kind or repayment at any particular moment. I'm just doing it to be helpful. And I feel good when I'm trying to be helpful. And it makes me feel good. And I wouldn't feel as good if you were offering me money for it. So both intrinsic motivation and social norms are similar, but they differ in the sense that intrinsic motivation occurs when we're doing something because we find that work or task intrinsically interesting. But social norms, it's not so much that we find it intrinsically interesting, we might or might not, but we're doing it to be helpful, to feel helpful. Okay, that's it. Hope you've enjoyed the lecture.